Hello and welcome to Encouraging Others in Loving Jesus. I'm your host, Kim Smith. This is episode 342. There was no one to save them but God. When have you been in a situation where the only way that this could possibly ever work out is if God Himself intervenes? We've all been there. We've all been in situations where no matter how hard we think about a problem, no matter what effort that we put into fixing it, no matter how many friends that we think we may have, no matter what clout we think we might be able to pull of talking to this power broker and that power broker, no matter what, we still can't get ourselves out of a situation unless God intervenes. I just flashed back. I hadn't planned on thinking about this, forget about talking about it, but a few years ago was in such a financial situation and had a financial institution that, in my opinion, did something shady, but there was nothing I could do to fix the problem. I was so dumbfounded by what had happened, and I was just in such a desperate place after Hurricane Katrina that if God didn't intervene, there was no way that this was going to work itself out. And I still, to this day, do not know exactly what strings God pulled. But somehow, some way, I walked into that business, which is about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, and went up to about the 7th floor and presented a check. And still, after all this time, when I passed that building, it's kind of like my Ebenezer, using an Old Testament term there, where you've seen God do something miraculous. That's kind of my Ebenezer, or one of them for my life. And so in today's story, which is more like a quick devotional, I'll be real honest with you, I already had planned on going that way, but then I've had all sorts of difficulties in recording, which is not something that happens to me usually. But this morning, it just wasn't meant to be. So I'm recording on a new platform. I'm trying to make this work because I know that I need to get this story out. So we have been making our way through the divided kingdom, and we've spent a lot of time recently in the southern kingdom, that being Judah, which was made up of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And so at 2 Kings 14, we're not going to talk about the first, let's see, how many verses is it? The first 22 verses, because we really have already covered that. It's about King Amaziah of Judah. We talked about him, but we used the text in 2 Chronicles because, as I've said many times before, the chronicler really was focused on the kingdom of King David, and so you get more detail out of that. But we're going to look at the short section down below, which it's 2 Kings 14, 23 through 29. And when we look at these kings, these ones that do evil in the Lord's sight, it's so easy to just think, what in the world could I possibly learn from them? Or what could I learn from that time period? But if Scripture is in Scripture, if God put it there, He put it there for a reason. Even the genealogies, He put them there for a reason. And so as I have read over this text a few years ago when I taught it in Sunday school, and then as I read over it the other day in preparation for today, it's a no-brainer to me as to what we pull out of this text. So Jeroboam I was the first ruler of the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. He had been part of Solomon's kingdom. He'd been part of his fighting men, and God chose him to lead the northern kingdom. But sadly, he led them in destruction. He led them in idolatry, setting up the idols at the upper part of the northern kingdom and the southern part, because he didn't want the people going into Jerusalem to worship. He wanted to give them a alternate place so that he didn't lose them to the southern kingdom. And he is known as just evil, evil, evil. And so many times the kings that ruled after him were compared to him because they were all evil. They were just varying degrees of evil. And then we get to Jeroboam II, which being named after Jeroboam was not a good thing. And so we get to this section, and it says in verse 23, Jeroboam II, the king, the son of Jehoash, began to rule over Israel in the 15th year of King Amaziah's reign in Judah. As I mentioned, if you want to read about King Amaziah again, you can just go to the first part of 2 Kings 14. He reigned in Samaria 41 years. That's a long time. And the thing was, even though he did evil, the people of Israel prospered in a human sense for a good portion of his time. It says, he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. Jeroboam II recovered the territories of Israel from Lebo-Hamath and the Dead Sea, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had promised through Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. And then we come to our focal verses. For the Lord saw the bitter suffering of everyone in Israel, and that there was no one in Israel, slave or free, to help them. And because the Lord had not said he would blot out the name of Israel completely, he used Jeroboam II, the son of Jehoash, to save them. And we're just going to finish this out. Verse 28, the rest of the events in the reign of Jeroboam II and everything he did, including the extent of his power, his wars, and how he recovered for Israel both Damascus and Hamath, which had belonged to Judah, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jeroboam II died, he was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Then his son Zechariah became the next king. And so you're like, well, what are we going to take out of this? Well, what I'm taking out and what I'm encouraging you to take out is what it says in verse 26, for the Lord saw the bitter suffering of everyone in Israel, and that there was no one in Israel, slave or free, to help them. In other words, our God of mercy, like these people, including their leaders, were all doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he could have easily just either turned his back on them, or he could have fought against them, as we've seen him do in some other podcast episodes. But in this case, he chose to come up beside them and make sure that they weren't wiped out completely. That didn't mean that he didn't allow them to reap the consequences of their poor choices. But when they had nowhere else to turn, there was God. There was God. And we definitely don't encourage anybody to get themselves in this kind of situations, because they got themselves in this situation because of their bad, sinful choices, their idolatry. But sometimes we end up in these type of situations not because of the choices that we made, but because of the choices of somebody else. When have you ever been in a situation where you felt like there was no one to help you, and it wasn't because of the choice you made, but the choices of others? Or sometimes it's because of a natural disaster where you're put in a situation where you feel like there's no place to turn. This is such an incredible reminder today that when there seems to be no place to turn, look up. Look up, because the God of the universe is hearing your cries. When you feel like there is nobody to save you, there's nobody to help you, you look around, you look inside yourself, you look in every human way, and there is no one to save you. just remember, but God. I have a shirt in my closet that's what it says, but God, which I guess I need to put down in the show notes. I need to put the title to a book that came out a couple of years ago. It's about the but God story of a young man who was in a horrid car accident, and there was no way in human terms that he possibly could ever live, forget about recover, but God. And so I'll put that down in the show notes because it's an incredible story that I was able to watch on Facebook over the time because I was connected to people who knew the family, but then read the book via Audible and really have been touched by it. So our weekly engagement feature is, when were you in a situation when there was no one but God to save you? And to take that one step further, how about we share that with somebody else? If you don't have anybody to share it with, send me an email at encouragingothersandlovingjesus@gmail.com. I would love to hear your but God story. Like, I would love to hear when God was there for you when no one else was. But most importantly, you need to remind yourself, because sometimes we get ourselves in such a pickle by just looking around us and looking inside of us and going, this is hopeless, and forgetting to look up to the one who, number one, provides all hope, but is omnipotent. He can do anything in more than we could ever ask or imagine. And so I encourage you to encourage your own spirit with the fact of what God has done when there seemed to be no one there for you, but also encourage you to share with others. Somebody is in a situation where they feel like there is no one to help them, and that there are no ways to go. There's just no help coming. But they need to know but God. And I intentionally have kept in the show notes the information for the suicide prevention hotline, and that information is down below. It has remained in the podcast notes now for the last few years, and I plan to keep it there. If by chance you're one of those people who feels like there's no way, there's nobody to help me, there's no one who cares, please reach out to that podcast. Please reach out to that suicide prevention hotline number, the 988 information that is down below. And for those of you who aren't in that situation, but you need to have that information with you in case God puts you in a place where you are the one standing between that person and making a decision that they can never take back. So as we see Israel in today's text and them struggling because they're making really poor decisions, it's a reminder that we also have been in those times where we felt like there was no one to help us. And reminding ourselves that even when it seems like there's no one to help us, there is always God. Next week we will jump back into the Southern Kingdom and talk about another of my favorite kings. We get past Jeroboam II, and we go back to one of my favorite kings, and that is King Uzziah of Judah. And so just thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing this with others. And just remember, it's always a trust and obey kind of day.